At InDigital, we know that public safety professionals hold themselves to a high standard. In fact, standard doesn't do it justice. In over 25 years working alongside you, carrying millions of calls over our IP networks, your dedication has inspired us. That's why our ESI Net goes beyond industry standards, not only i3 compliant, but designed to adapt to future development for a network you can count on when it matters most. Learn more at indigital.net.
If Within the Trenches has ever taught you something, open your eyes to what it is like to be a 911 dispatcher, or has inspired you to become one, then help support us and join our Patreon. Get exclusive bonus content, one-of-a-kind swag, discounts on merchandise, ad-free early access to new episodes, and much more. To join, please visit patreon.com/WTT podcast. And if you're an industry partner, we have something for you as well. And now, for the show.
This is Jordan, and you're listening to the Code 7 Podcast Network.
Warning. This episode contains the 3 A's of podcasting: adult content, adult language, and awesomeness. You've been warned.
Welcome to Within the Trenches, true stories from the 911 dispatchers who live them.
Hey, what's going on? This is Ricardo with the Code 7 Podcast Network, and this is going to be episode 564 of Within the Trenches, True Stories from the 911 Dispatchers Who Live Them. This episode is sponsored by InDigital, a leader next-gen core services, and a big shout-out, as always, to subscribers of the podcast, whether you be on Patreon, as well as Circle or Facebook. It is Friday the 13th, September 13th, 2024, and a lot has been going on. I know I say this all the time, but man, this past week, 1 week ago today, I was not in good shape, and I was actually diagnosed with diverticulitis, and that shit is no joke. I was in all kinds of pain. If you have ever had this, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And I'm on my last day of medication. It has had me kind of loopy. My brain is like all scattered and everything, but I'm back at it. For all of you who responded to my post out there asking for patience and such because of what I've been doing. And, you know, this is a weekly show and I got to keep episodes going out and everything else that was going on. Luckily, I had one already that was ready to go. And now I've got this one as well. But thank you, all of you, for the love and support. Just all of it. This has been hell. It has not been good. And this episode actually is going to be an Imagine Listening session. The session was recorded back in April of this year, April of 2024. I partnered up with the North Carolina State 911 Board, and we did a lot of things. It was during the National Public Safety Telecommunicators Week. I was out in North Carolina at 2 different counties, and I was out at Burke County as well as Johnston County. And this episode is going to be the Imagine Listening session that's part of my 8-hour communications course. And we've got tons of stories that were written down that I ended up adding in there, as well as the live audience sharing their stories as well. So we've got several Imagine Listening as well as open mic episodes that are going to be coming up. And without further ado, here is episode 564. Within the Trenches, True Stories from the 911 Dispatchers Who Live Them. Imagine watching your son take off on his four-wheeler. You've witnessed this many times. He rides, he has fun, and all is well. Now imagine you're 911, taking a call from frantic parents who have just found their son underneath his flipped four-wheeler. You listen to the parents as they scream while they remove it off his body. You tell them that help is on the way, and you give them CPR instructions. An officer arrives, and you listen as he performs CPR. "Come on, buddy. Come on," is what you hear over the phone. This is what it is like within the trenches of 911. In this episode, You'll hear stories from the I Am 911 movement, a movement I started to fight for the reclassification of dispatchers from clerical to protective and bring awareness to the types of calls that 911 dispatchers answer on a daily basis. This is an Imagine Listening session, and we are here together in Burke County 911, North Carolina. Now, you heard the warning at the beginning, but I must warn you again and add that if you suffer from PTSD or have suicidal tendencies, you are listening at your own risk. The stories you are about to hear are all true and come from the dispatchers who lived them. While some stories have a good outcome, the majority are horrifying. This is our reality. Your worst day is our everyday. So let's start with a bang. I want you to imagine each story. Become the dispatcher who has taken each call and imagine listening.
As I said before, I had the Thursday before Christmas, an officer-involved shooting. In 20 years, that was my first one. It was only my second Signal 25. And the boys that were out there were literally boys, 25-year-old kids, same age as my son, who also went to school with my son. I had just worked Monday, Tuesday. I was supposed to be off on Thursday. I worked Wednesday, Thursday, and was due to come back Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I was working fire and rescue with two other people. The other two people were on the law channel, too busy on their phone. We're supposed to check on our guys every 5 minutes. At 6 minutes and 58 seconds, I checked on him. Asked him if everything was 10-4. He said no. Signal 25, shots fired. And my heart sank. At that point in time, I didn't know who had been shot. I had two guys on scene. But he was pretty calm, cool, and collected, so I really believed it was the suspect they were on scene for, which was a mental health call, in which the gentleman was holding a .357 Magnum to his head, threatening suicide, with a wife and two children there. History of PTSD, ex-military, not on his medication, and been drinking. We had just dealt with the same caller 2 days prior on my rotation. I set off the tones and sent everybody and their brother. One of the other people in the room, which is only had 9 months experience. Oh, that's not what he meant. I said, that's exactly what he meant. I said, that child there knows more 10 codes than anybody in this county. And he knows them very well. He uses 10 codes nobody else uses. And then I made the call to Lieutenant. Told him I wasn't sure exactly what I had, but I had a Signal 25 with shots fired. Are our boys okay? I said, I think so, but I cannot confirm nor deny. He said, who's there? Told him who was there. I said, Sergeant's en route. You tell Sergeant to call me when he gets on scene. Yes, sir. In the background, I could hear the one with only 9 months experience going, what the hell's she calling him for? Because I'm doing your job. Got EMS going, got everybody going. In the meantime, I'm dealing with them, cutting up, carrying on. Everything's a joke. Nothing was a joke. You couldn't get more serious than that moment right there. And I didn't even know who was hurt yet. Checked on him again. CPR in progress. First it was applying direct pressure. Third time I checked on him, CPR in progress. but they still don't know who's been shot. I had various commands start checking in around. More smart ass comments. Oh, he always goes to calls. No, he's in charge of investigations. He doesn't go to calls. EMS got on scene, pronounced him deceased. It wasn't until probably another 45 minutes before I found out who had actually been shot. Thank God it was not one of ours. But I knew that boy's life was forever changed. And I finally said, I gotta step out. And I went to smoke. On my way out the door, one that I trained myself was supervisor on duty that night. And she said, I'm sorry. And I just turned around and walked out. I was so angry. At that moment in time, I also got a text message from a group called Big and Small Peer Support, which is made up of paramedics, law enforcement. And it was something that wonderful they started in our county for just minutes, just like that. And she happened to be on duty. And she said, I just heard EMS. I'm here if anybody needs me. And I hit the dial button. And I told her I was losing my shit. And talked to her for about 20 minutes. And I still had probably an hour and a half of work left. I went home. I was due to come back in that night for my regular rotation. Sometime during the day, I ended up with a text message telling me that the one that I'd covered for that was out sick would be working that night. Okay, great. Saturday, I still couldn't get my act together. And I worked night shift as a supervisor with two others that 2 years experience and less. And we are responsible for the whole county. And I wasn't mentally where I needed to be working that night. So I called out, talked to my coworker, called out at 1 o'clock, and I said, I just can't, I can't get it together. Next thing I know, I've got text messages back and forth from the higher ups, basically telling me the one with 9 months experience, who's on call that weekend, had severe side pain, need to go to the doctor, and that since I wasn't contagious sick, I would have to come to work. I said, well, mental health is just as important. My responders are my first and only priority. I said, they're like my kids out there. And if I'm not 100%, I can't take care of this county and the other two in my room and my responders. I said, I will not be at work tonight. Well, you're going to have a doctor's note. You're not going to get holiday pay. I said, holiday pay has nothing to do with this because the holiday is not until tomorrow. And I said, whatever, I won't be there. So I said, okay, you want a doctor's note? Even though technically I don't have to have one, I went and got a doctor's note. The doctor turned out to be not my regular doctor, but she had 12 years prior experience as a paramedic. Told her what was going on. She took me out of work for a week, up my medication. I then sent my note in. I was supposed to see her again in a week. She called me. She says, I have to postpone our appointment for another week. I got COVID. Okay, so I sent the new doctor's note in. In the meantime, I get an email from the boss lady telling me that she's putting me out on mandatory FMLA and mandatory 3 counseling sessions. I said, well, I'm already seeing a personal counselor and mandatory doctor. So, needless to say, now I'm doing 2 counseling appointments and my doctor. And the things that she wrote on that FMLA paperwork did nothing but make me angry. And I couldn't tell you last time I was so angry. And basically talked about demoting me and having to do these counseling sessions, and that I've been a problem child for a couple months. And I said, well, that's kind of funny. I've not had one write up, one phone call, one text message, one meeting, nothing. So this was all new to me. But unfortunately, that's her way of dealing with us. So, in essence, by the time FMLA paperwork got filled out and sent in, I was taken out of work for 3 months. I have not worked a console since that night. One of my best friends, who's now retired, that I worked with for 20 years. I've been at the same comm center. It's the only one I'd ever worked at. Happened to put me on three-way with, and she said, girl, you come out here and you go to work for me. So I live 3 hours away. And what they did was absolutely wrong. Absolutely wrong. Not one phone call from my director. Not one phone call from the second in command. None of them. The only ones I heard from were my direct co-workers that I've worked with for a very long time. And when I started there, I told them I would retire from there, and I had every intention of retiring from there. So instead, I am now 3 hours from my home, renting an apartment while the rest of my family is in, because of how they treated mental health. They restarted training sessions this year, finally in person. And guess what our first training session was? Mental health. I said, well, that's about a slap in the face.
Thank you so much for sharing.
So you need to go to county when you're done here, please. Because a lot of them won't speak out. And they just had 2 people that were shot by somebody else, and they did a debriefing, thank God. But I heard from the deputy that was involved, because he was very upset to find out I was out of work. And I didn't even recognize him when I saw him the day I resigned. And I went over to the sheriff's office. It's right across the parking lot, and said goodbye to some friends and old folks. And there was this young man standing in front of me, and he looked at me and he said, you don't know who I am, do you? And I said, oh God, please tell me you're not who I think you might be. He said, it's me. We hugged and we cried. And all the boy does is keep apologizing for not talking on the radio so I would know who was okay.
I'm glad you had that moment, though.
Yeah, we talked for about 4.5 hours.
The first story I'm going to tell is from my first agency. I started in 1994. This was the most horrific call I've ever had. And then the second story that I'll tell is from my first and only so far officer-involved shooting where my officer was killed. I was the only dispatcher on duty that night. It's very devastating to me. And I carry his picture and his band with me. And that's how I remember him every single day and honor him. My first agency was a large agency. We had 4 dispatchers We also dispatched for a city police department, and a city fire department. The night this happened, we were shorthanded. It's just myself and another dispatcher. We were moderately busy, and it was during the weeknights, and 911 rang. I picked up the phone, and all I could hear was kind of a weird breathing, almost like an agonal breathing, and a very low moan, and a man yelling every curse word, every obscene word about a female he could possibly come up with. And all I could hear was him just hitting and yelling and screaming, "You whore, you bitch," every possible bad word he could yell. And I was like, "Ma'am, are you there? Can you hear me? Are you there? Can you hear me? Is this your address?" She never responded to me. I had my entire shift there because she never responded. I kept hearing that agonal breathing. So I had the entire shift there, had EMS staging. Sergeant was going. When they got there, nobody was there. So they walked the way they could enter the house because the door had been kicked in. They entered the house, and when they walked through the carport, they could hear like a noise, like air was coming out of something. So they entered the house to clear the house, and they find a female, and she's laying. There's a wall when you enter the house, and it splits the house. One goes towards the kitchen, and one goes towards the formal, like, dining room. And they couldn't tell she was a female, except for she had a bat inserted into her, a baseball bat. They cleared the house. No one was there. There's a telephone laying by her body, and it was an open telephone. And that's one of the last things that he beat her with, other than the bat. So they called in, they cleared the house, let me know that it was temporal for EMS to come in. Her heart was still beating. Her head was pretty much flat, brain matter everywhere. He had broken into her house. He was her ex-boyfriend. Her husband had passed away in a boating accident. He worked for a very large company, and he had died drowning. He didn't know how to swim, and they were out boating, and he died drowning. So she inherited a lot of money. They had an 18-year-old daughter, and she worked at a steakhouse that was very popular and still is in this city. This was Christmas night, and he'd been down to the steakhouse, had been drinking, and told her that because her mom broke up with him, she found out that he was embezzling money from her accounts, because he's the one that set all the financial stuff for her. And when she found out he was embezzling from her, she broke up with him. He'd been in her house earlier that day, and she called 911. And that's the last call she made on her phone. And going back and looking through the call logs to see why her number called 911, then that's when we found it. And that was the whole story was kind of written in there in the narrative. So we don't know how long he had been there, but he had enough time to write all these obscenities in her blood on the walls. He had beat her with everything possible. The phone. He had other things pulled out, hitting her, beating her. But he had beat her lastly with a bat. Sexually assaulted her with a bat. You could not tell she was even female because she was so swollen. Very tiny, small lady. She was so swollen, and her head was basically just flat. And when he left the house, he carved all those obscenities in the hood of her car, stabbed each one of her tires. They had just missed him. From the time I picked up the phone, they got there within 3 minutes. So, obviously wanted to catch him. They knew his name. He called the next day. This is all over the news. He called the next day to the bank, his bank, to try to stop payment on check. And the teller said she knew the name. And she said, "Sir, I'm sorry, our head teller has to make that authorization. She's at lunch. May I get your name and phone number so I can have her to call you back so we can get that authorization for you?" And she thought very well on her feet. So they called us, and our SWAT team, our detectives, went out to, because he was in a different state, which was a neighboring state, just 15 minutes down the road. And they made contact with that agency, their SWAT team, and waited till dark, went down there. He gave no problems at all. He had contacted one of his teachers from college that he had stayed in close contact with. And he went down there and he was trying to talk men to, say, "Hey, let's take you on down there, and you need to give up, you need to turn yourself in." So when they came, the teacher turned out all the lights, outside lights, because it was like in the middle of like 5 acres, and it was a long drive up, so they weren't going to put their cars anywhere near it, so they wouldn't know that they were coming. He wouldn't know they were coming. So they snuck up, and when they knew they were out there, the teacher turned out, or the professor turned out all the lights, and he walked out there with them. The guy had his hands up. They towed his car. His car was there. They towed his car. All his bloody clothes, everything was there. He didn't have, give any problems, turned around, put his hands up, hands back so they can handcuff him. So all the evidence was in his car. He confessed to everything. But it was one of the worst calls I have ever heard. The things he was saying, beating her at the same time. And back then, in the early 90s, there was no peer support groups. There was nobody to talk to except for the other dispatcher I spoke with, because at that point in time, that wasn't very predominant. You okay? Yeah. Anything? Nope. Kind of thing, because it just wasn't thought of back then. So once it came to trial, his brother is an attorney, and had a nice large team for him. I was subpoenaed because I listened to him beat her to death over the phone. And he got to pick. They told me, to disregard my subpoena, because he took a deal, and he got life in prison without eligibility for probation at all. But he went in and, went through these appeal processes, and he got out in 2018 and said that there's case law on this that I found when I found out he was out of prison, that they were what his sentence was too harsh for the things done, the things for what was done. And it's when you read case law, and I'll write it down for everybody. It is amazing. And when it talks about the dispatcher heard this, this, and this, and this, basically it's legal mumbo jumbo, and his brother has a hand in all of it and got him out of prison. It's just 25 years later, after he brutally mutilated this woman in cold blood. Malice, forethought, because he talked to her daughter, and told her he was going to do it. Absolutely horrible. And she was parentless at 18 years old. Makes me sick.
Thank you.
And when you try to go home at night and lay down and try not to see that, because basically my supervisors, after everything was cleared, they wanted me to see what I was going to be talking about. What I heard. So they wanted me to see the house, and that way I can relate what I heard and what he wrote and relate everything. So, and then,
That was the wisest choice.
well, it actually didn't help. It looked like helter skelter. But back in the 90s, they could do that. But it did help. But honestly, it was horrific, and nobody should ever do that, ever.
Thank you for
Thank
sharing.
you. My second one is my officer that was killed December 11th, 2020. A wonderful, wonderful guy. I sent them for a break-in in progress. The owner had cameras, so I was able to give them every single thing he was doing, where he was at inside the business the whole time. And I don't want to mention his name because he still has parents and a sister that's living, and it's close by. So I dispatched them, let them know what I had, and they were all right there. And the sergeant had gone home because he had K-9 training, and one had court. And they parked their cars far, far away, so the guy wouldn't see them. And he was in there. He was, took the till, the money. The owners tell me exactly where he was at. I said, does he have a weapon? Can you see a weapon, a gun, knife, anything on him? And he's like, he's wearing a big, large coat, either camo or tan colored. I cannot see anything under it because it's big and bulky. So I'm relaying all this to the three officers. So I don't know if he has a weapon. And so I let him know which way he's going. I said he's going to exit from this area. And so there was one officer in that area where he exited, and the two others, came around and flanked him. They heard the officer give him verbal commands, and he went down like he was going to, comply. And he swung around in one swift move and pulled a gun out. And they all were right there together. And he shot multiple times, and he hit my officer twice. And so my corporal said, shots fired, officer down, officer down. So I called. I said, I called, and called it. I just asked, which officer. So when I called my admin, really quick, let them know who it is, because they're going to be asking. And so called a good friend of mine that I work with, and she has paramedics there, all 3 officers on board and at the hospital within 9 minutes. Every on ramp, exit ramp blocked off, sea of blue all the way down, and escorted them. So from the time of the call, time he was shot, 9 minutes to the hospital. So I'm thinking, okay, this is good. Because I asked him, I said, can you advise? And he said, unconscious, not quite alert, but breathing. So, well, okay, he's gonna be okay. He's gonna be okay. And they got him to the hospital. Had been called, and people called in to come in. And of course, the SBI wanted me to stay. So, because I'd been through 3 officer-involved shootings prior at my first agency, and no officers hurt, thank goodness. And so I ended up staying, and they actually didn't need me because they had everything right there with the reporter. So I have a daughter who is a flight nurse, and her supervisor saw it on TV, and I have a daughter that's also a paramedic. And so they both met me at the hospital. Their supervisors let them off, and when I got to the hospital, he had just passed away. And I had no clue how bad the injuries were or exactly where he was shot, and I lost it. I absolutely just lost it. His mother was on vacation at the beach, and they were flying her home, and she sat down waiting after they deplaned. They were waiting for their luggage, and she never saw. It was plastered all over the news, but they didn't have his name. And thank goodness, she said, I'd never looked at one of the TV screens at all. She just knew that he'd gotten hurt at work, but nothing was told any further to her than that. And I think that helped her. I really did. Not knowing before they picked her up. And when I walked in and heard his dad say, what am I going to do without my son? And everybody just cried. It was just this horrific thing. But after the fact, so many people came out and talked how it helped them, paid for gas for them. That there's a lady that her family was traveling through that had a disabled daughter. Their car was broken down, and he got them a tow truck, paid for a room for them overnight until their vehicle was ready the next day. And just so many people came out and said, well, he could have given me a ticket and made everything worse for me, but he opted not to. And just the sweetest guy. And he has a sister, and their slogan was, be in pursuit of the ultimate good. And right before he was dispatched to that call, he came in and brought his citations. And so they made bracelets for him. Mine's a little wonky. They made bracelets for all of us. And this one is, they shorten this a little bit. It says, pursue the ultimate good. And then this is his last signature, or his print from his
Wow.
His last citation that he had just brought into me right before he went back out.
That's awesome.
They were so good to me. They made sure that we had we had one person come in and talked, and we weren't very happy with that. They had another peer support group that came in, and my guys wanted me, with their support group. They were amazing. And just as one dispatcher, I thought, wow, thanks guys. But we had a great group. We always got along really good.
One family.
And so, absolutely. And so for Police Week, they couldn't have it for 2020 because of COVID. And they sent me with the officers for, to see his name, put into the etchings, candlelight vigil, and, when they would actually recognize each individual officer. And they put the rose at the memorial at the Capitol. It was absolutely amazing. And I couldn't ask for anything else. And they put me out of work until, I decided I was able to handle it, go back, because I was tore up. And the memorial at our police department, if you have a chance to look it up, there is an eternal flame. It's the most amazing memorial you've ever seen. There's blue lights where his car sat, that crisscross in the air. 3 poles with flags, the thin blue line flag, the North Carolina flag, and the American flag. There is several statues up there. There's bricks that people bought, and they can put anything on it they want, for other people, in memory of, or it is the most beautiful thing you've ever seen, ever. And I'm surprised I held together.
Thank
But
you.
thank you so much for letting me do that.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
I have to look that up myself.
Yes.
I cry every time I tell it, so I'm sorry. To tell you about my call, I have to tell you about me. I have been dispatching for 6 years. I have really struggled with my mental health my entire career and before. When I started dispatching at 19, from 18, about 18, 19 to 21, I didn't think I was going to make it past 21. I didn't have plans. Nothing. I was going to live to be 21, and that was it. So, I'm working in dispatch on my birthday. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm here. What do I do now? Where do I go from this point? Because I didn't expect to be here, and I don't know what to do with myself. So my birthday falls on a weekend, and my birthday was Friday. And shortly after, in that same weekend, I take a call from a 16-year-old kid. And he is sitting in his backyard. He's home by himself. And he's sitting in the backyard with a gun. And he's just crying and crying to me because he doesn't want to live anymore. And I'm sitting here, and I know exactly what that feels like because I'm right in that same spot. And me and this kid talk for quite a long time. The county I was working in, it's a very rural county. It's not something you get police anywhere in 2-3 minutes. We're talking like a 10-15 minute response, even running lights and sirens. It's just that big, and they're that understaffed. So I'm talking to this 16-year-old kid, and we talk about being human, and I have to, in that moment, to relate to him, to get him to talk to me. And he tells me what he's going through. He tells me that nobody cares about him, and that he feels like he's got nobody. And I'm sitting here listening to him say this, and I tell him, well, I care about you. And that's a very true statement, because I do. And he said, you're the first person that's ever told me that. And we talk for probably 20 minutes, and I've got everybody going like as fast as they can get over to him. And they get to him and get the gun away from him and get him in the back seat of the patrol car, and he's still got his cell phone. And they try to get him to hang up the phone because they're there now and they can take over, and he refused. He would not hang up that phone. He's like, I want her to stay with me. And I said, it's okay. I'm going to stay right here with you. And it disconnected at one point. Somebody else was one of the other law enforcement officers didn't know they had got him and was trying to call him. And he accidentally kicked me off the line to answer the officer's phone call. And he starts yelling at the officer. And he's like, I don't want to talk to you. Put her back on the phone. Put her back on the phone. And so they get me. He comes across the radio and they're like, get her back on the phone with him. And they get me connected back to this kid. And I stay on the phone with him the whole time. He's in the back of the patrol car, all the way up to the hospital, all the way up to when they go take him in for intake. And I remember getting off the phone and thinking, well, I guess that's why I made it to 21. So, like, any time that I start moving back towards that dark place with those dark feelings, or I wonder why I'm here, it's for that kid.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
And every other kid that comes.
Proud of you. I'm a firm believer that there's some calls that we take that are meant for us because of some sort of experience, something that we've lived through that allows us to connect that much more with that caller. It's not to say that any of our partners would not do a good job. They probably do a great job. But that type of connection wouldn't be there. And it just helps us in those split seconds to have a deeper connection with that person, just like your caller who did not want to let go with you. You were the first person who told them that you cared. You're right. I feel like that was meant for you.
May 29th, 2016 was just another night shift like any other. My shift had 6 people working. We had mandatory 1-hour breaks to cover, so my coworkers and I would take turns covering the radio. So I happened to be the one to answer the radio when one of our rookie deputies and his FTO began a chase. The rookie gives us their location, vehicle description, and tag number. The FTO takes over the radio traffic calling the chase. He tells me they're pulling into a driveway, numerics unknown. I tone it out to hold a channel. A short time later, the FTO keys up, shots fired. My heart drops into my stomach. At this point, we still don't know the house number. The tag on the vehicle was registered to an address on the same road, so on a hunch, I sent everyone there. The FTO keyed up again and advised, shots fired again, man down, send EMS, CPR in progress. My first assist car gets to the address and confirms it is the correct location. The suspect was the man down, and both of my deputies were relatively okay. We didn't find out until several days later that the first shots fired was when the suspect's dog charged my deputies. The second shots fired was after the suspect had wrestled the ASP away from the rookie and was fighting back. The FTO had to shoot him to save his rookie. I am 911. My story is not one I took or dispatched. We listened to county. On unselect in case we are needed in county. I hear a female officer request EMS emergency traffic to the middle school, reference a student unconscious on the bus. Hearing the panic in her voice, county kept asking for the officer to repeat multiple times. A male officer checked on and started CPR on the child. My son is the same age as this boy. Knowing and hearing the desperation these officers had that day stuck with me. He didn't make it that day. I am 911. Our department took a call for a missing person, a mother and a child, on day shift. We searched day and night for both of them. We had detectives checking real-time cameras, and all of us dispatchers were calling all of the hospitals around to see if they have been there. We finally get a sighting that another agency was out with them that afternoon for a welfare check. So then, from that point, we knew, at that time, they were safe and worked backwards. Our officers looked almost our whole shift from our jurisdiction into 2 others. Then, I remember and will never forget one of our officers yelling out on the radio, "I found him," referring to the baby. The child was around 10 months and froze to death. The officer's voice has always stuck with me. My trigger is children because I have 2 children. Us dispatchers and officers were so drained physically and mentally. I am 911. 14 weeks, 98 days old. 911 call. Man screaming. He won't wake up. Caller seemed to be struggling to talk. A background noise that sounded like a hurt animal. I'm a mom of 4. I know what a crying kid baby sounds like. He tells me he fell. His eyes only open when I pick him up. EMS is dispatched. I have a weird feeling about this noise. I upgrade the response. While en route, I get that the patient is 14 weeks old. EMS goes emergency to the hospital. Law enforcement is dispatched. The caller, I won't say Dad, was shaking this baby so hard, its brain detached. I've never heard a child baby sound like that. That sound still haunts me. Another thing, DSS took his 3-year-old 2 weeks prior to this. They were unaware of the baby. The baby is alive, with brain damage and blind. The officer called to check on me and kept me updated on the baby's status. I couldn't look at my baby without crying for a week. It's been almost a year, and I can still hear that sound, like I took the call an hour ago. That call reminds me that there is evil in this world. I am 911. We had received a 911 call for 3 people unconscious in a vehicle in a parking lot, an older woman and 2 babies. While gathering information for dispatch, a female exited the store, entered the vehicle, and drove off. We ran the plate, and the vehicle was a rental. I contacted the rental company, who would only provide me with the address to who it was rented to. When personnel arrived, the female was carrying an unconscious 1-year-old back and forth, taking shopping bags in the house. Personnel found an elderly female and a 3-year-old still in the car. All 3 patients were transported to the hospital a few blocks away where the female had drove past to return home. The 1 and 3-year-old were flown to a trauma center. The elderly female was revived locally. The 1-year-old died. Hospital advised his insides melted together. The 3-year-old was able to survive. The female had left the babies and the elderly woman in the hot car while she shoplifted at 2 stores. The investigation led to interior of the vehicle over 110 degrees. The female was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter. I am 911. My partner and I received a domestic call which my partner Mo answered. About 15 to 20 seconds into her call, my semi-passive listening was snapped when Mo sternly asked, "Does he have the gun in his hand now?" I clicked on the call to listen and motioned to Mo to let her know I was doing so. I wanted her to concentrate on listening and I would give the call out. I proceeded to give the domestic out on the air when I heard a child in the background yelling and screaming, saying, "Don't, Daddy. I love you." The caller was the daughter of the subject with the gun. It was then I heard the father say, "Well, you can thank your fucking sister that you won't have a father anymore." This was one of the very few times I have ever said, "Units heading to, you should probably step it up." We don't get to make this call, and this just sort of came out. Mo continued to ask about the gun and who had control of it, while also trying to get the caller to take the younger brother out of the room. The whole situation began with the dad having a bad day and getting into an argument with his wife. Our first units arrived 1 minute and 36 seconds into the call. As we continued to monitor talk and try to calm the situation, the officers started making their way on foot towards the house. Just as they got to the house, the daughter started yelling that he's going back outside. Almost immediately, we could hear the officers in the background giving commands. Then, within seconds, we heard a barrage of gunshots. That was followed by "Subject down, start EMS." Our officers had fatally shot the man as he refused commands and started to raise his weapon. It was all over within minutes. But the thing that has always remained with me was that little boy's plea to his father. The boy was only 7 years old. I am 911. A call that sticks with me is a suicide called in by one of my SROs, school resource officer, at one of our schools. My SRO called in. They had reports of a deceased subject, so I sent many other units, fire and EMS. After a few minutes, officers on scene confirmed they had a male subject deceased with a gunshot wound. We had started getting phone calls from parents, etc. The last call I took was the male's mother and had her on the phone when they confirmed on the radio that it was in fact her son. The anguish and fear in her voice when I told her that an officer would call her back. My youngest son had just graduated, and all I could do was try to comprehend and understand what she was going through in that moment. It was so heartbreaking, and I will never forget the fear and pain in her voice. I am 911.
I've had a lot of calls I've taken in my career, but February 20, 2023, I answered a routine 911 call and saw it was plotting at an address that I knew really well. My caller, very familiar with where I worked, being family, they screamed, "Tyler, he's not breathing." The call was my Aunt Tammy saying that my Uncle Johnny had stopped breathing that morning. I put my personal emotions to the side, giving my Aunt Tammy, CPR instructions and hearing her struggle to get him into the floor. I was able to talk her through CPR for several minutes until my cousin Eric could get there and take over. My Uncle Johnny lost his life that day due to a massive heart attack. I always feared getting that call from family, getting that call from a loved one, especially when somebody in cardiac arrest. But now looking back, I would not have traded. I wouldn't trade that for anything. That emotional connection that I experienced with them that day and Tammy. I wouldn't have wanted to speak with anybody else. I'd always feared that, and after it occurred, I don't know what it is. It's just the emotions feel.
Yeah.
Can't replace that.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I know sometimes it might not feel like, what's the point or whichever. But this is good to be able to get this out, especially in a room, again, with people who know what it's like to feel comfortable, to be in a safe place, to share these. Because others will hear, they will learn, they will understand, and they will ultimately not feel alone.
Welcome back, and there you have it. That was a powerful Imagine Listening session, once again, out there at Burke County 911 in North Carolina, and a big shout out to all of you who were there, those who were part of it, and even if you didn't share a story, man, that is okay, because you were there in support of each other. So thank you so very much. Plus, a lot of you actually wrote down stories that are in the episode as well. But again, shout out to everybody who was there. Shout out to the North Carolina State 911 board. And it was just an honor to be there with all of you. Especially, it was the week before National Public Safety Telecommunicators Week. That's what we were doing all of this for. And I believe we're working on doing it again for 2025. So I'm very excited for that. And we've got several episodes coming up. And we've got not just Burke County, but as I mentioned, Johnson County as well. We've got those that are going to be coming up as well. And just, again, for all of you who are there, thank you. This broadcast has been sponsored by InDigital, a leader in next-gen core services. Shout out to subscribers of the podcast. And if you want to become a subscriber of the podcast, or if you ever want to be a guest on the show, you can simply email us, and that's going to be wttpodcast@gmail.com. Once again, that is wttpodcast@gmail.com. The easiest way to do all of this is to simply go to linkswith2eyes.co/WTT podcast. Once again, that's linkswith2eyes.co/WTT podcast, and you'll find everything there. Email where to listen to the latest episode, where you can order now. Imagine Listening, Volume 2. That's right. On September 5th, my eldest son's birthday, September 5th, 2024, Imagine Listening Volume 2 launched, and it is doing very well. You can get it on Amazon, or you can get it directly from me. And once again, that is linkswith2eyes.co/WTT podcast. You can find it all there. We've got Dare to Be Great that's going to be coming up in a few months in December. So much more good stuff. So make sure to check it out. It is going to be excellent. Got a lot of good things coming, and I cannot wait to share it with all of you. This can be seen on Facebook, YouTube, as well as X and LinkedIn Live. And then you can listen 24/7 on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, your favorite podcasting app, and withinthetrenches.net. Have a good one, everyone, and we will see you all in the next one.